Here we go! Hello everyone! It's time to talk about Shin Godzilla. This is a big moment. I've been wanting to watch this movie for 3 years. I remember hearing about it when it came out. It got a limited theatrical release in North America, and I was curious back then, and I could have just skipped doing this whole review series thing and watched it like a normal person would, but no, I had to build up to it. Shin Godzilla is the 29th Godzilla film produced by Toho and the 31st film in the franchise overall. Released in 2016, it is the first Japanese Godzilla film to come out since Final Wars in 2004. That 12-year gap between Japanese Godzilla movies is the longest there's been yet. This movie was co-directed by Hideaki Anno, who also wrote the screenplay, and Shinji Higuchi. It was a long time in germination. Despite the rumors, it was not made in response to the 2014 American-made Godzilla. It was given the official English title Godzilla Resurgence, but that didn't stick, and it's commonly referred to as Shin Gojira or Shin Godzilla. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't have a definite meaning. They purposely chose the word Shin because of its ambiguity. It can be translated as true, or new, or God. Retroactively, this movie is being called the first film of the Reiwa period. The Heisei period of Japanese history ended just last year with Emperor Akihito's abdication, so the timing is a little off, but it's kind of like how 1984's Return of Godzilla is considered by some the last Showa-era film, and by others the first Heisei-era film, even though the Heisei era didn't start until 1989. That Godzilla had a brand new look, as this one does, and ushered in a whole new series of films, as Toho is promising to do now. Whatever way you look at it, we are definitely living in an exciting time when both Toho and Hollywood are putting out Godzilla films simultaneously. Now, for 3 years, I carefully avoided pictures and video clips and reviews of this movie so that I wouldn't have the whole thing spoiled for me. I wasn't completely successful. I did know a couple things going into it. Doing this review series, it's been impossible not to come across images from Shin Godzilla, and I've been intrigued. I've also been a little freaked out. There have definitely been some things that I saw accidentally when I was looking up something else, and I was like, what is that? So I went into it with eagerness and optimism and a feeling of what on earth is this gonna be like? And I came out of it feeling overwhelmed and saying, how on earth am I going to review this? I think if you want a short, succinct review, if you just want to know, did you like it or not, you're going to be frustrated. This one isn't that simple for me. I will do my best to present my own personal observations, but I'm not sure if I can give a final verdict right now. Honestly, my mind keeps changing about certain things, and my opinion is very unsettled right now. So let's get on with the review, and let's start with the best way to get the ball rolling, a plot summary. A series of bizarre incidents has the Japanese government scrambling to determine a logical cause of the events. In spite of the convincing home video footage that seems to show some sort of sea monster, the politicians dismiss the absurd idea. Until that monster comes ashore and starts crashing its way through the country. As the government struggles to find a solution, the unpredictable radioactive creature mutates again and threatens to annihilate Japan. Shin Godzilla takes a brand new approach, doing something that none of the other Toho sequels have done by wiping the slate clean. Other films, especially the Millennium-era ones, ignored preceding sequels, but they still incorporated the events of the original 1954 film. This one does not. This is a world in which Godzilla has never surfaced and has never attacked Japan. Basically, this is our world. Our world if a giant, grotesque, radioactive animal came out of the ocean and started wreaking havoc. Before Godzilla became a cultural icon and a well-loved anti-hero, he was just a monster, one that represented a nation's fears of atomic testing and nuclear detonation. Shin Godzilla does the same. The movie goes back to the franchise's roots and serves as a fresh reimagining of the original scenario. The movie draws inspiration from current events, especially Japan's national tragedies of 2011. It also utilizes updated technology, features contemporary acting and directing styles, and goes places with the graphics that the 1954 film never could have gone. And where previous films have touched on the government's efforts to deal with Godzilla to varying degrees, in this movie, the government's response is a primary focus. We see politicians asking realistic questions, like should they try to destroy the monster or contain it? If they evacuate, where do they send people? Can they avoid killing civilians? And how will they explain the mobilization of the Special Defense Force to the rest of the world? That last point, dealing with the mobilization of the SDF, is something I found especially interesting. The post-war military restrictions on Japan is something that seems to have been glossed over in past Godzilla films. I've noticed it from the beginning, so to see the controversy addressed here, realistically and as part of the plot, is good. What I think is an even more intriguing concept is that it takes a different approach to the monster itself. This isn't just a dinosaur that's been awakened, whatever, or brought back by atomic testing. This is something that, because of its exposure to radiation, has become a new creature, one that is constantly changing. The movie aims to reinvigorate the idea of Godzilla as an unfamiliar, unprecedented, unpredictable threat. Shin Godzilla is supposed to inspire fear and awe. Does it succeed in execution? Well, I think that depends on who you ask. For the very first time, we have a Godzilla that is able to change its form. The new variable of spontaneous, even willful mutation forces the military to cope with a rapidly changing situation. I like that. Form number 1 appears as a vague, mysterious shape, almost like an enormous tentacle, which turns out to be a tail. We don't see much of it, but what we do get hints of is strange and spooky, especially the disturbing flood of blood in the tunnel. Note, this Godzilla bleeds a lot. Form number 2, I wish I'd had a camera rolling to record my first reaction to this, because what? I honestly don't know if I want to laugh or cry. On the one hand, it's hideous, but on the other hand, it's a little goofy. It's partially the big googly eyes, they're distracting and kind of funny, but that's not all it is. There's just something about the movement, I don't know. I guess the design is supposed to resemble a moray eel, which, okay, it's different. My mom thought it looked ridiculous. I don't think that's the reaction they were going for, so that's unfortunate. Either way, if I think it's terrifying or if I think it's silly, I don't like looking at it, and I'm sorry for making you look at it if you think it's as disturbing as I do. Form 3 isn't pretty either, where Godzilla starts to get really gnarly looking and grow out these nubby arms. There are some good destruction sequences here. Godzilla's movements are so chaotic. He hurls himself into buildings almost senselessly, like he has no control over his body or can only lead with his big head. So basically, Form 2 is the crawling stage, and Form 3 is when your baby can take a few steps but is unsteady and keeps toppling over. I don't know, thinking of this as toddler Godzilla somehow makes it even more bizarre. In past reviews, I've said how freaky I find certain kaiju designs. Biollante, Destoroyah, Megalon, even Batra. This is the weirdest thing I've ever seen in a Godzilla movie. But hey, I would expect a giant radioactive mutant monster to be repulsive and misshapen and unidentifiable and kinda gross. So it works, as long as you don't start laughing at the sight of it. And if I was in one of those buildings on that street, and I looked out my window, and I saw that thing just barreling down the road, I would be so terrified I might just drop dead. And have you seen the concept art? It's somehow even more disturbing. Form number 4 is the one that's closest to what we're familiar with, and it's the form Godzilla takes for the bulk of the movie. But even that design has a lot of updates. To me, the first most noticeable feature is his protruding sternum, mainly because I'm wondering, why is that like that? But he's also got a fixed grin and small human-like hands that he holds up in a certain gesture, almost as if he's saying, "Why? Why?"
CGI!
In this form, he travels very slowly. I think it's a proportional thing, because he's just so big, 118.5 meters, and size hinders his mobility. Just look at those thighs. Speaking of proportion, his eyes either shrank or just don't seem as big now that the rest of him's caught up. They've gone onto the opposite end of the spectrum, they have kind of a beady look. And his skin has a bumpy, warty texture that really reminds me of the skin of the original Godzilla. Except it's kind of splitting in places, which is where the red glow shows through. You really wouldn't want to touch it. There's a fifth form as well, revealed at the very end of the film. I didn't totally realize what I was looking at, and I don't fully understand it, and the original concept design was even freakier. Given all the crazy stuff that they did go ahead and do, I'm shocked to learn that they were actually holding back. Old-fashioned suitmation doesn't really cut it anymore, so they used a variety of other methods to bring Godzilla to life, like CGI, a lot of CGI, animatronics, sculpture, and motion capture, which seems to be replacing suitmation for 21st century Godzilla films, and I'm agreeable to that. Like suitmation, it allows a human to play the monster and give it realistic movements, and the actor can provide facial expressions as well, and it's not so hazardous. When Godzilla first shows up, he's not really attacking. Because of his size and his lack of motor control, destruction just happens as he blunders onto land and moves around, but in general, he's benign. When helicopters show up to shoot at him, he observes them with mild interest, like an animal that's never seen them before and doesn't have cause for fear. And of course, the entire arsenal of the SDF has no effect on him. That changes when bombers strike his spine. Godzilla's shocked by the sudden pain, and then a bunch of stuff happens. His red glow turns purple, and then he starts vomiting fire, which then concentrates into an atomic laser beam. I didn't like this beam at first. The CGI seemed too clean, too linear and perfect. I'd rather it be more rough, like the rest of this Godzilla. But on second viewing, it's not as clean as I thought, and it's actually cool how precise it is as a defensive weapon. He also can shoot multi-directional lasers, photon lasers, I don't know, out of his dorsal plates, and he can shoot a laser out of his tail. I guess his tail contains a backup head? I don't know. I read that on Gojipedia or Wikizilla. I had to get used to the laser beam thing. It doesn't feel right calling it atomic breath. And it's a little strange to me, especially the way his jaw splits like that. Again, sorry for showing you the weird visuals if that's not something you were prepared for today. After watching this movie, I kept thinking that this depiction of Godzilla reminded me of something, and it took me a while to figure it out, but I got it. Shin Godzilla is like Frankenstein's monster. It's like Frankenstein's monster of the nuclear age. I thought this was a very original thought, but after a little browsing on the internet, I saw someone else say something similar, so never mind. Still, I did go to the trouble of writing a mini dissertation on it in my notes, so basically, they're both creatures that have no rightful place on Earth, having been forced into existence by man's actions. They both have a passive attitude toward men until attacked, at which point there is a violent primal reaction in response to shock, pain, and fear. They both are capable of unleashing tremendous destruction by accident because they have no sense of their size, no fine motor control, and poor coordination. Yet they both are intelligent beings, and this intelligence leads to self-awareness, the understanding that they should not exist, and that man considers them a threat and wants to destroy them. This understanding leads to fear, and rage, and despair. As I often do, I've got to talk about the music. Shin Godzilla features a score by Shiro Sagisu, who wrote the music for the anime Neon Genesis Evangelion, which was created by this movie's director, Hideaki Anno. Supposedly the music here includes themes or moderated themes from that show, but I wouldn't know since I'm not familiar with it. What I did recognize was the incorporation of Akira Ifukube's themes from various Showa-era films. Yay! The score is a patchwork of old and new. Some of the old tracks even sound like they were taken right off of the original movie's soundtrack, imperfections and all. And the new music joins so many different styles and instrumentations together. There's traditional film music style and atonal compositions and heavy operatic pieces and rhythm-based percussive pieces and so on. I've listened to the Shin Godzilla soundtrack separately a few times now, and it gets better with repetition. I like it. I don't enjoy every track equally. That seldom happens anyway, but there's some really good stuff. What especially stands out are two of the choral tracks, which surprisingly have English lyrics. Number one, the main theme, Persecution of the Masses, which has a great string section and a feeling of escalating tension. And number two, Who Will Know, which plays over one of the major scenes, a highly impactful destruction sequence. You wouldn't know it without looking at the lyrics, and even then, it's not without ambiguity, but the general consensus is that it actually represents Godzilla's perspective, communicating his pain, melancholy, and loneliness. Obviously, this movie is pretty dark and serious, but it's not without some humor, and I appreciated the style of humor here, which is usually subtle and has some tongue-in-cheek moments, and it's not overly corny or dorky. Do all the quirky jokes stick the landing? Not exactly, but everything moves so quickly that if something doesn't work, it's not long before you've moved on. And I actually felt grateful for the little comedic touches, which helped lighten things up. Otherwise, it's a heavy movie about a despairing monster and a group of politicians. In fact, given that Godzilla himself gets less total screen time in this than in your average Toho movie, I'm guessing, I didn't actually calculate, you could argue that the political satire is the main plot. A lot of the conflict comes from the politicians wasting time with incredulity and bureaucratic red tape. When they do take action, it's ineffectual, though it's not so much incompetence as hesitation and unpreparedness. The main character gets frustrated and splits off to assemble his own special task force of rogue scientists and self-described nerds who pool their resources and analyze the creature in order to figure out how best to combat it. Personally, I found a lot of this entertaining. The government navigates the complications of military restrictions, crisis management, public relations, radiation contamination, economic collapse, and so on. The movie takes a practical approach to the whole situation and fleshes out each development in a way no Godzilla movie has before. However, I'm not sure that there isn't a little too much politics. This is a Godzilla movie, and I don't know how many people out there who want to watch a Godzilla movie are on board for this much bureaucracy. I don't mind it, it's interesting, but it's a lot, and even with the pacing as fast as it is, it can threaten to bog down the story. Actually, it might be even more difficult to handle because the pacing is so fast. The editing is fast, the dialogue is fast, which makes it tricky when you're watching with subtitles. Not far into it, I realized that I was going to have to watch the movie again, because the Japanese version with the subtitles turned on, at least the first time around, is dizzying. There are subtitles on the bottom and subtitles on the top, and the actors were directed to talk fast, meaning that the titles don't stay up for long. I was trying to read and comprehend and watch and take notes for this review and eat a sandwich, and that's why my notes are an unintelligible mess. We watched the English dub version about 5 days later, and it was definitely easier to follow without so much text on the screen. But this was also my second time around, and I was familiar with the story and the characters and where everything was going, so that also helped. I still am in favor of watching the original Japanese version over the dubbed version, just as a matter of principle, but in this instance, it is a challenge. Fortunately, the dubbing is much better than it has been in older movies, aside from the fact that the dubbing actors are much more emotive than their on-screen counterparts, and they repeatedly mispronounce the word nuclear. It's a good audio track. Overall, I think the movie has good, realistic performances. I've seen a lot of not great acting in this series, and I was pleasantly surprised here by how convincing a lot of these performances are. One exception is this character, who I thought stuck out as being really over the top in contrast to everyone else. Part of the problem, a big part, and this wasn't the actress's fault, is that she's supposed to be a US senator's daughter, but her English is really rough, nothing like a native speaker. I read that the actress, Satomi Ishihara, was alarmed at how many English lines she had in the script, which is why I say it wasn't her fault and I feel bad for pointing this out. But I would think they'd have a language or dialect coach on set to help with this, so I don't know how it got through. And beyond that, I thought she made an awful lot of unnatural gestures, and that was distracting, at least in the first half. She got better later. Her character ushers in the stuff with the shady top-secret intel swaps and Goromaki's riddle and the implications that the US had nefarious intentions, none of which was the most enjoyable part of the movie for me. Parenthetically, there are quite a few digs against the United States in the script. It's a Japanese movie that's very pro-Japan, so that's fine. Is it anti-American? I don't know. They still ask the Americans for military aid, but there's a lot of resentment and irritation and dissatisfaction toward the Americans for their interference, so take from that what you will. I wasn't totally on board with the whole Gogeta is God incarnate theme. And the ending did seem a little anticlimactic, but I think that was intentional based on the way we see the characters waiting, unsure what to do next, how to react, breathing a sigh of relief, but kind of in a holding pattern still. It's actually pretty funny. So, closing thoughts. I'm intrigued by the overall concepts, and I think they did a lot of interesting things with the scenario. It's different in a lot of good ways. I also think it stumbles at times in execution. Did I like it? I liked parts of it, definitely. I was bewildered by parts of it, too. I will say this, I liked it better the second time. I assume Shin Godzilla was made primarily for an adult audience. I just can't see kids getting excited about this one with so much emphasis on politics and science. Maybe I'm wrong. As thrilling as it was to see a film handle Godzilla so seriously, I did miss the sense of fun. When the movie was over, I didn't have that satisfied, positive feeling that some of the other ones have given me. Shin Godzilla has been hailed by many as the best film since the original. As far as that goes, I think it's a matter of what you're looking for. If the lighter films are your favorites because they're fun and bombastic and wildly entertaining, then you might not prefer this. If you want a Godzilla film that's like a horror film and a tragedy, then this might be more up your alley. I count both dark ones and silly ones among my favorites, so I'm kind of in the middle, and my feelings toward this one are kind of in the middle, so there you go. I have noticed that this has turned into a somewhat divisive film. People on both sides can get very defensive about their opinions, even when no one's challenging them. That's how people are about their opinions these days, I guess. That may be because of the film itself, which does take risks, but also, well, we've got a Japanese Godzilla film sandwiched between two American Godzilla films, and I suspect there's a fight for dominance going on between Shin Godzilla and potential Japanese sequels and the American MonsterVerse Godzilla series. If I'd known back in 2017 that there was controversy in the Godzilla fandom, I might not have undertaken this series. I like to give fandom wars a wide berth. By the way, I don't know if they plan to do a sequel or not. I thought the ending here was a bit inconclusive, so it wouldn't surprise me if they continued the story. Like I said, there are reports that Toho is going to produce more Godzilla movies soon. I just don't know to what extent they'll piggyback off of this one. Ugh, that was a long review. Thank you so much for sticking around through the whole thing. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, I am very curious to hear your thoughts on Shin Godzilla, so please feel free to share them in the comments below. I look forward to reading them, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching!